Okay, we are live. So today here we have Shyam, and Shyam is someone I'm familiar with. He works with me at Northeastern, but I think how most people are now going to know him is as the analyst for the new Contenders team Malice. And you guys were pretty darn surprising yesterday. You really came out of the gate and punched hard. So you want to tell us a little bit about that team and maybe tell people who missed it what happened there, whether that was within your expectations, beyond them. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So yeah, thanks Temporal for having me. For those of you who are now like I guess getting to know me, I am Sham. Um, yeah, so obviously we acquired the previously Saints spot in Contenders. Is how we like ended up making Contenders, and it's like a huge like long saga of like how we ended up getting to that point. But obviously like we were doing our best to build like an incredibly like capable and qualified roster, and I think we had like a very extensive like scouting process, trial process to really get that in. But obviously like Contenders is such a high level of competition that to just build a roster organically of 6, 7 people and then have them compete against the Contenders champions is a daunting task for anyone. Um, so I think even going into the match, like we kind of saw ourselves as underdogs for sure. Like we understood that we were taking on the Titans, but
Sure.
um, our philosophy is like we built a roster and they already had like a lot of pre-existing synergy. Like some of the players had played on Susanoo, like a bunch of them were like friends, like played in ranked. Like it's a really good group of guys, and so like there's like a lot of community already. And what that sort of leads to in Brawl is like we like to play fast and we like to be aggressive. And it's interesting when you look at a team like Revival, who
Hmm.
is like one of the pioneers of like Brawl in this meta. They're also a team that likes to play pretty fast, I'd say, and they're pretty aggressive. And like Cloudy on Ryan, he likes to sort of take it to you. And so in our own discussions, we were like, well, like these guys are going to take it to us. Like, what if we just took them off guard and punched even harder back at them, right?
We're just getting
Um,
jabbed first. I love it. Okay.
Literally. And
Uh,
so if you watch like our map on Nepal yesterday, I think we executed that so well. Like we didn't let Revival get any opportunities in, and that's just because we kind of alphaed them in terms of, like energy, and like the screaming and everything. Man, it was so fun to like watch the players like go through that. So I wouldn't say that we expected to lose. I
Sure.
think that we're still definitely disappointed that we weren't able to come away with the series. We're also though very like proud of ourselves for the way that we played, and sort of like having proved people wrong. I think a lot of people like looked at our new roster and they said, oh, these guys bought the spot. Okay, a lot of these guys haven't had success in Contenders before, really, like, so they
Well,
weren't super high on us. Yeah, go ahead.
who and how were you hearing that? And what I mean by that is like it was a little under wraps that you guys exist. Okay, obviously some people knew, but it was mostly under
Sure.
wraps. Like even the websites, the OverGGs, the Liquipedias, the everything was sort of expecting that, oh, this will be the Saints competing, etc. And then day of was really when that, or maybe day before was really when that announcement happened. So like, who were the doubters? Obviously, yes, there's the Scrim scene, and things
Mm,
don't always get leaked, so there were potentially people. But in the Scrim scene, they know how hard you punch, so like that seems like it would be earned or not. So who were the doubters? Let's call them out
sure.
by name. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because obviously, like we all get invited to like the Contenders like server and whatnot, and all of
Sure.
the internal workings they happen like pretty far before, and
Yep.
then like the scrim scene happens, and then like people will talk, and then people outside of the scrim scene. So like I think we did an actually like decent job of like not getting a roster leak, but I will say like the day that our roster was announced like officially, and like the day that our branding came out and all that, like it was a weirdly like I think negative reception, and that really like put us all on a footing of like, hey, no, we want to prove these guys wrong. Like people
Absolutely.
look at it like
That's
Krawi,
fuel.
I think, yeah, like I think, I mean, I can just go through my players, like
Please.
Akash on main tank. I think he's like fantastic. I think he's a fantastic player. He's really really smart, incredibly vocal, like a really solid leader. He's also been in like Australian Contenders for a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And there was like a bunch of stuff about like leaving Susanoo and like a lot of question marks around him. Like people were like, Akash is a Contenders main tank again, like oh, like a weird sort of like air around that. But I think he like yesterday, people all I saw typing in chat was like big boy MTD, like cloudy confused, like all of this other stuff. And I think that's really good to see for like especially like our players are pretty young. So
Sure.
it's nice to have that for like their crop. Continuing on, like Krawi, I think he hasn't been like in the most competitive scene for a little bit, where he was like on Kratos for a while,
Hmm.
and then like problems arose in that roster, and then like he had like a project that didn't make it through OD, so people were like, oh man, like I don't really want to play with Krawi. So even throughout our tryouts process, I think Krawi was heavy on like, man, like I know that I'm one of the best and I'm gonna prove it. And like all of these people doubting me, like I'm so much better than them. So he went out and he just like ate every single male like a crazy person. So
That eating
he's
every
he's
male
insane.
will win you a lot of maps. It's true. It's true. Very good. Very good.
Same thing too with oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say. So it sounds like Crawley, you think, was perhaps an undervalued piece going into this. Would you say that's fair? Would you say he was the most undervalued piece on the team, or do you think you kind of found a lot of gems that maybe people thought were rocks?
Hmm. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that Krawi is definitely one of. I think Krawi and Angelic, in my mind, are tied for the two most underrated gems on our team,
Okay.
uh, in terms of what they provide, because I think both of them are veteran, experienced players
Hmm.
who get passed over, and it's like a
I was going
weird
to say
thing
it's hard
to
to sell me on Angelic being, but I guess I'm from a different era, so that makes sense.
yeah. And so it's like weird because there's so many of these like veteran players who are really solid
Yeah.
and people just doubt them because of their past performance. Like, oh, like people had the idea and assumption that like some of our players like don't perform well in matches.
Hmm.
And then we go out and we perform so well in yesterday's match, even if it comes out like not in our favor. People are like, wait a minute, like do I have to rethink my assumptions about these players? And I think that's what our organization and our team is all about right now. It's like proving that we still have it.
Sure, sure. Do you think there's going to be any sense of fragility there in terms of some of these players have been successful in the past and they're sort of used to that success, and maybe if things go south, they're immediately going to be fragile there? Or do you think, nope, that's really not going to be a problem? Do you sense any issues there? Obviously, you don't have to leak stuff, but I'm going to ask questions.
No, I don't think there's going to be any fragility with our roster, especially for the foreseeable future. I think all of our players are comfortable knowing, like, yeah, we are a good contenders team, and we have a lot of potential to be like one of the best. And we
Okay.
can take revival to these incredibly like insane series, and we can almost win them.
And
And
if
like I
they
think everyone knows about that potential.
Okay.
Yeah, but go ahead.
Okay. No, I was going to say the fragility would more have to do with when you're winning, it covers a lot of mistakes, a lot of potential issues. But like if you took a loss to Revival is unlikely to shake a team in a bad way. But if you guys took maybe a loss against a team that maybe they wouldn't expect after this good performance against Revival, like let's say Dark
Hmm.
Mode did great, do you think that would be, oh no, this is tough? Or do you think the team would come back pretty strong from that?
I mean, knowing these guys, like they're all young, but they have like incredibly good heads about them. They have
Sure.
really strong like internal team leadership, and also they all like to play with one another. And I think
Good.
that's an underrated aspect, obviously, of like building a team. It's like when we did our like recruitment and our trials and whatever, like all of our players like they wanted to play with one another, and that's like a huge factor in like sticking together and like enjoying each other. So like all of our guys, like even last night after a tough loss, like we're all sitting in VC and we're all like watching the rest of the matches of that day and like talking about like what things we can do right and wrong, like going forward, like how we can fix it. So really like I'm really proud of them all for being so resilient, and I know that like we're gonna pound for the
So
rest of
I
this.
think that pivots pretty well to a place that I wanted to explore. Like that's great to hear, but I think we do want to explore a little bit. What does team building look like? Like, you've been, hey, this would have been a project that got built. What does that look like when you're building a team to either climb through the tier 3 scene or in tier 2? You've now seen this a couple times. What does that look like? Because again, the general audience here is going to be like, well, what does that look like? How do these teams get built? What do trials look like? How do you come up with a list? How does this happen? Can you walk us through that a little?
Sure. So I can walk through like so I was on a tier three team as an analyst like previously, and I
Hmm.
guess like in terms of like rosters for tier three, it's like the philosophy is very interesting about how you go about it, right? And I think it's gonna vary, especially even like within contenders. The team building processes are so different between each organization. Like there is no like one set way of like here's how it's done. And I think that we personally on Malice had a really successful roster building process. It also took a lot of time, and
Okay.
a lot of people were like confused. Like I think we've probably been building this roster for months. And obviously like it's now coming to a head for like this week specifically, but like we started low and we said like, hey, we're gonna be an OD project.
Okay.
and we were trying to build the best OD project that we could. And then as new opportunities kept coming up and like kept coming up, it was like, okay, now we're building a Contenders project. And it just like that's sort of how it expanded. I'd say there's a couple things that are really valued in the process. Like
Okay.
one, you want really strong mechanical players.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's just like a given. I think at basically every single level, like under the Overwatch League, there's very few situations where picking up like the strongest mechanical player isn't going to net you the most wins, if that makes sense. I think team synergy is incredibly important, but lots of times, like if I took the roster of like the LA Gladiators and I put them in open division,
Sure.
like and they didn't know any of them and they had no scrim experience, like they would still probably win open division
Mm-hmm.
just because like they're that caliber of player. So if you can find people like that, it's really important to look for.
Sure. So it's
Second,
the. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. I mean, second would be if you don't want to go that approach, then you have to go the team synergy approach, and you have to pick up players who have a lot of like synergy with one another, and have played with each other before necessarily, and sort of can
And
account
how are you
for.
measuring that? Are you measuring that by listening to their comms? Are you measuring that by going they've been on a team together before? Are you measuring that with an eyeball test? What does that look like?
Absolutely. It's all through like internal tryouts.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, we started with like internal trials and then we moved on to an external phase, which is like internal blocks of all of your trials together in a lobby 6v6 and you shuffle it. And then externals, which are you take a set number of players to a scrim block and you see how they perform against an already established existing team. So there's like two main phases to how that works, and how we assessed it. And so we take like the strongest performers from our internals and then we'd put them against good like external opponents and see how they respond, because it's important to measure not just how they perform in like a random block with random people, but how
Mm-hmm.
they perform against teams who already have synergy and already like have a play style like for themselves, and see how they work in those adverse situations.
Sure. So you mentioned that this was originally going to start as a T3, the best open project you can get, which, that's great. And just through happenstance, luck, hey, look at the options we have, it turned into, wait, this is a contenders team. This makes sense. Did that mean that at some point along the way, you potentially had to, maybe because better opportunities became available or whatever the case was, go, hey, we thought player X and Y was going to be on the team. Maybe we'd, soft locked them to the roster and now they're not, because now that we're moving up in terms of other players are on the team, different players become available to us. How do you handle that? How do you handle we're keeping a lot of people sort of waiting for how this team goes? Or is that just something that's accepted in the trial community these days?
Yeah, it's that was especially tough. And I think like our team was pretty responsible about leveling our expectations with
Hmm.
everyone as it kept on going. Like, and I think it was sort of clear like who we were going to go with for a little bit of time, at least in our trials phase. But
Hmm.
we tried to do our best, obviously, for every single player that came through our trials process. And even like plenty of the players who didn't make our selection process this time, like I'm still really close with, and like they received coaching from us. Like they were really like happy to have gone through our process and still like learned, because at the end of the day, like
But you're making a future opponents better, Sham. Why would you ever do that? Okay, go ahead.
I personally am a believer in like the longevity of the scene,
Uh,
so I'm like
I know.
happy to give feedback to yeah, whatever. But for all those players too, like especially if they're not on a team currently and they're coming to like high level blocks with other high level players, that's still good practice time. So yes, the goal is to make it through, but even we had plenty of people who just come through the ring and know that they weren't going to be given the opportunity to trial for us, just so that they could get in that like time of practice against really good players.
Hmm.
um and so that's also just a factor. And so yeah, exactly like you were saying, like as our expectations like internally what our team changed, like the player selection process definitely did change. And yeah, our roster doesn't look the same as it did like from day one of like what we sort of anticipated it would look like. And I think that's a really good thing. And like you need to constantly evaluate. I think if like we had just done like a couple teams, like probably in tier three, we'll just do the thing where it's like, okay, we need to build a roster. We'll do like a week of trials. We'll have like 3 blocks and then we'll see everybody once and we'll pick all the best players, like having never seen them actually like play together.
Sure.
And then like that's just how we're going to build our roster. And I think that's where you really fall into traps where there might be a honeymoon phase of all these players are really good, and then they start to fall off because they don't sync with each other. They have different ideas about like how to play the game. They're like um, just not like working well together. Like there's so many variables that go into this that to build a long-standing project and
Hmm.
roster, you need to like take your time.
So again, for the average viewer, getting some of these, very good players who have potentially been on contenders teams or are known to be good players in the tier 3 scene, generally is going to require, getting them just going, hey, so and so is starting a project. What is the initial draw to potentially get these names? You said that you guys leveled up, but when team building, just because say people are curious, what is it that sort of gets teams interested? What establishes the level that your team is going to build at? Because again, you said your level went up as the process
Yep.
went on here. Is that like the big name coaching that you had? Is that hey, we've locked down one or two players and other players want to play with them? Is that hey, everyone heard about the project and they're curious? How does that look?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, actually, because there's plenty of different ways to approach this, and everybody does something different, right? If you're an organization that's recruiting, you need to establish your value in some way, shape, or form to all of these top players, because no top player is going to want to go to a project that they think is doomed to fail. So there's some, like, if you're in building a team in tier 3, for say, a lot of what people gravitate towards is like organizations that are well established, aren't going to break down, fall apart, or have sponsorship of some kind. So there's some like organizations in tier 3 that like have good partnership, like have monetary sponsorship, may give you salary to some degree,
Sure.
something along those lines. That's attractive. That stability is attractive. And then you have the complete flip side of that, which is like maybe more player run organizations rosters who are good players that you want to play with. And that's really attractive too, because if you think they're good players, then you think that you can win with those players. So that's a really big piece of it. I think for us, one of the biggest things that we had going for us was like staff
Hmm.
and coaching, especially. So with like our structure, a lot of people were very happy that like we kept tryouts so structured, even if they were very long, and we appeared as like one of the most professional organizations that they were dealing with. We were transparent about what was happening. Like people were happy to sort of like come to our tryouts and in our organization. And I mean, not for nothing, like we had a really strong tryouts list too of like other players who wanted to play for our organization.
Sure.
And so people would come to the internal blocks and they'd be like, "Oh my god, like that person is here! Like that's crazy. I want to be on a team with that person." And then it just goes from there. And the more people like that you can get who like are willing to give you like one block or
Yep.
like 2 blocks, and then suddenly they're giving you all of the time that they have in order to continue to make sure that they're on your organization is like a really good feeling.
Great, great, fantastic. So what I heard from all that was they had you, Sham. Everyone could tell you were amazing, and they all wanted to work with you. And you know what? It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
Mm. I think like for myself personally, I think I'm still like pretty much unknown, right?
Yes.
But what's most important is like if you're a staff member on any organization that you're like actively trying to show people that you contribute value meaningfully. And that's not just like I did a lot of work and I spent a lot of hours grinding something that was completely unnecessary, which is how some people take it, right?
Yep.
Like you'll have plenty of like especially coaches, I think, who'll be like, "Guys, I just spent like 9 hours scraping VODs and I
Mm-hmm.
determined that this team likes to play fast."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's what took you 9 hours to like come up with versus like the coach you spent like a couple hours and is like, yeah, so like this is specifically like what they like to do here. And here are their tendencies. And here's what you can do to abuse them. And that's like so much more useful and valuable. So one is definitely like, even if you're like kind of an unknown person, if you're able to prove that like you do relevant work that's going to help a player, it's really, really important.
Definitely, definitely. I hope it's better now, but I certainly remember long transitions or long phases of okay, this person is just doing a lot of work to try to prove that they belong here, but you're measured off your value. I mean, this is a do you win, do you not win, do your players get better, do your players not get better? The same as it is for the players, do they win or
Yep.
not, type thing. So, uh, excellent, excellent. I think that's great advice. Okay, so if I want to move on here, let's maybe do. Okay, so you're still attached to, or you've been recently in the tier 3 scene, so let's continue to poke in there a little bit. Do you
Sure.
think there's other people there? Like, if you were looking around, and I'm not going, oh, let's go build a team, but do you feel like there's any players that you went, oh, hey, these players missed out, but they're players that you go, they would be the best hidden gems, maybe in tier 3, maybe in contenders? Who do you feel are sort of the hidden gems right now who don't get enough credit, who you sort of have your eye on? And if you're going, nope, too close to the chest, don't want to talk about it, that's fine too. I'm just picking your brain.
Hmm. Um, in terms of hidden gems,
Hmm.
let me actually like look because there's plenty of like top. Yeah, I get kind of sensitive about this topic for a variety of reasons. I think
Sure.
right now, like the culture is such that like even casually, people believe that there's like massive differentiations between all of the tiers of players. That right?
Yeah.
Like tier 3 is like so much worse than tier 2 and tier 2 is like so much worse than Overwatch League. And I think the reality of it is like almost all of these players are 4500 or 4600 peak at like these top levels. And
Yep.
they all like play the same game.
Yep.
So really, like, yes, they can have skill differences, and yes, they do things differently in a game. And like, yes, their team operates differently, and so you're going to have different results. I'm not going to put the top tier 3 team against the San Francisco Shock. That's not happening, right? But I think there's so much more room for like cross pollination between Squimmer environments where it's also isolated right now that like I would love to have like more like scrims against like one trick tier 3 teams who are
Hmm.
like mechanically insane at the heroes they play, right?
The
Like
bubbles
nobody likes to, yeah,
the
go ahead.
bubbles do break every once in a while. Sorry, I'm supposed to pretend to be ignorant here. So, sorry, continue. Tell me. Tell me more about how these bubbles are isolated and they don't play each other. Good. Sorry, continue.
Well, yeah. So I mean, yes. So like, for example, like contenders teams will do warm up scrims, and like sometimes the tier 3 teams will be able to like slip into the warm up scrims, and stuff like that. But I would just like, I think there's a lot of like trying to protect people's reputations that goes into not doing those scrims because it can look badly on one team if you like don't perform well,
Hmm.
etc. So I understand sort of all that, but yeah, I would definitely not sleep on a lot of the top tier 3 teams right now. Because I think some of them are like quite fantastic and could do extremely well in these competitive environments.
How? I mean, I'll just ask since we're here. How do you think Malice measures up against the Overwatch League teams? I know you obviously. I don't know this. I assume you haven't been scrimming them because I know the Owl teams are rather protective in who they scrim against, and they'll scrim against Revival, American Tornado, but I
Mm.
doubt would have scrimmed against you yet. But where do you think Malice would land? This is a fun thought experiment. Do you think they'd land below 20, around 15, up at 10? Where do you think they'd be?
I mean, it's my team, so it's clearly number one. I
They're
think we beat
perfect. That's a
Houston,
safe answer.
absolutely.
That's a safe answer. I
Yeah.
like it. Good answer.
uh,
Okay. Um,
Realistically, though, I think that
sure.
we would absolutely beat some of the worst brawl teams in OWL. I
Okay.
think that that's a reasonable expectation, and I would love to be proved wrong.
There you go. The invite is open for all you
Yeah.
teams out there. The invite is open. Okay, okay. And do you guys find mostly so for the scrim scene again for the audience, is it mostly hey NA contenders teams scrim against NA contenders teams? How do they figure out scrimming? Is it like a well we know what the bracket's going to look like ahead of time, so you scrim against teams on the other side of the bracket? Do you go scrim against the EU teams? Do you go scrim against the L teams, tier 3 teams? How does that work for the average listener?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, brackets are definitely consideration. So, like, if you have a belief of like one team is favored in this match, so we might play them in the next round or something like that, then yeah, people will usually say no, we don't want to scrim you because like leaking comps is like pretty bad. You don't want to leak exactly what you're going to do in competition. Competition is competition. Obviously, when you're outside of like this week of contenders, then it's much more open. And generally, you get scrims with the teams who want to scrim you and like who you want to scrim. So like there's a little bit of preference there. But yeah, overall, like people have been like at least in this contender cycle, like
Hmm.
a little bit selective of the teams that they want to scrim, because they just don't want to scrim you if you're going to be in their bracket.
So is it like just the week of? Is it 2 weeks before? How far from a match do you have to get before you go? The practice against a good team is more valuable than potentially giving something up when we're not going to face them for 2 weeks, half a week. Like what would you say
Hmm.
the time frame is for that right now?
I'd say it's about 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, so let's pivot over to collegiate for a bit here. So obviously
Sure.
you know the collegiate scene. You spent some time in the collegiate scene. One could argue you still spend some time in the collegiate scene, but you spent some time there as a player before you moved on to being a
Yes.
coach here. So how have you seen that evolve in your time in the collegiate scene? Because you've certainly been there longer than me. How have you seen that change? Be that get more serious, be that get more teams, be that fall off a cliff? You tell me.
I would say the first two. I don't think the falling off the cliff has been the case at all.
I
But
didn't say it
yeah.
was.
But yeah, I have seen it get a lot more competitive in a variety of different ways. Like not just not just in the level of competition, but also in the mentality that people take into the competition, right? It used to be that like you would face an even team, I think, and there was a lot more like friendliness and a lot more banter and a lot more like silliness and like
Hmm.
less seriousness. Like you were just playing a good team and you were trying your hardest, and that was fun. Now there's a lot more like, okay, like what is this team going to run on Busan, right? And we need to figure out exactly like what comps they're going to roll out with so that we have the most optimal chance of like winning this match. And I think like that's a little bit like it's much more competitive, and it aligns a lot more with like traditional sports. But sort of the collegiate environment is transformed from like a club of friends to like an actual
It's
competition,
no
which
longer a
has
rec
its pros and
league.
cons.
It's
Yeah.
okay. Okay. What do you think some of those pros and cons are? What do you think some of the good and bad of that is?
I mean, I think you missed the days where there were some just like insane teams at the club level
Hmm.
who would just utterly dominate, like, and it was like they were having fun and like
Sure.
trolling, and like they weren't tied by like necessarily like school regulation while doing so. So they didn't need to like worry about anything, and they were just out there like playing Overwatch and having fun.
Okay.
Um, Whereas now there's a lot more like pressure and stakes on the line, right? Like if you're on a scholarship for your school and you're sort of like designated as like a team that like needs to win, like you need to care about like your power rankings and your school's reputation and like all of this other stuff. You need to compete with like your jerseys and everything. So like obviously the investment has been really really awesome to see, but yeah, you do lose a little bit of that friendliness. Like I remember like just like being friends with so many like other like people who played collegiate previously, and now it's like I can be friends with these people, but like when competition happens, I like need to sort of like shut that away and make sure that I take the match like 100% serious.
So talk to me about the Chinese wall that you built between people you were trialing that were at schools that you were competing. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Good nervous laugh. Good nervous laugh.
Yeah. Well, no. So in that state, I mean, assume you're referring to our
I'm not
Northeastern versus
I'm
Bellevue match.
I'm
Yeah.
not worried. You're I'm not worried about it. Okay. Let's okay, so I think that's interesting. Is there anything else about the collegiate scene that you think I should be asking you about that you'd like to say, or shall we pivot back to Malice and then wrap up here?
I think that right now there's a misconception that in the collegiate scene that there's like almost infinite money coming in. I think
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of people, yeah, I think a lot of people like very much assume that like every top team in collegiate is like on a full ride to the university of their choice and like they're doing all of this like crazy stuff, and it's just like really not the case. I think
Right.
if you're incredibly skilled as a player and you want to get into collegiate Overwatch, then yes, absolutely, like look for good programs that are willing to give you some funding. But if they come back to you with a number that's just a couple thousand and it's not a full ride, like don't immediately scoff at it, because it might be just
Right.
that that's one of the best offers that you get, even as like a 4,500 or 4,600 like contenders level player.
Right. You've seen, and I've definitely seen this as well, and I think that's great of you to point out. There's a little bit of a belief out there from some people that, oh, these places are just making bank on scholarship, blah 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 blah, doing this, and it's like, no, most of them are getting partial rides. There's very little out there in terms of full rides, even for the top stuff. So I think that's
Yes.
a great point. Um, so what else is going on in the esports worlds at colleges though? Do you have much insight into that in terms of, a lot of people are already out of college that are already out of college or long past that and are sort of going but still play Overwatch and are sort of going, well, what does esports look like? Those weren't things when they were in school. Are there like esport facilities? Are these games like watched live at schools when COVID isn't going on? Like, what does this look like for, compared to you maybe can't compare it to before, but maybe you can in terms of what is this like for schools? Does this get the viewership that a soccer game gets, a football game gets, a round of, I don't know, golf gets? What's it look like? Are there
Yeah.
facilities for
I mean, I
players,
think
for fans? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the school very much in terms of like what you're looking for. But I think some of the top schools are very much like franchising along that traditional sports route where there
Hmm.
will be live viewership and there will be player facilities and everybody gets a jersey and they get their like social media posts and a website for themselves to like promote, and all that cool stuff is definitely coming, and like personalization of like the players themselves outside of like who they are in game is on the way. um which is it's going to be very cool to see, because I think it's very different from what we've seen historically, like since the beginning of Overwatch's life cycle to to where we're going now, I think esports is definitely trending in that more like serious, more school sponsored direction
Sure.
at the collegiate level. So yeah, it's definitely going to be exciting. But that's how the investment is definitely.
Sure. So what you're saying is collegiate is actually the future of localization for Overwatch, not Overwatch League. Okay, I didn't say that. I didn't say
Yep,
that.
one
Oh,
hundred
you
percent.
did. You did. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So I think we can wrap up here unless we have questions from chat or things that you missed. But I'd probably like to finish off with pivoting back to, once again, you're working with Malice. They are the Contenders team that just broke into the scene, and it was a really impressive match. If people haven't seen that already, they should definitely go back and take a look at that, as well as follow the rest of the rest of this Contenders. I always recommend that. Contenders is super interesting, and the teams look very interesting right now in terms of the shuffle that's happening. If you want to follow Shyam, see what he's up to, we did link his Twitter in the description below, so definitely do check that out. And is there anything else about Malice that you think or really about anything that you really think we've missed that we should cover here?
I mean, I think that all of my players are fantastic, and I think that they're going to do incredible things this contender season. We
Nice.
have our first losers bracket match today, and it's not going to be broadcasted. So
Oh, they robbed
yeah,
you. They
I
robbed you.
know. So God willing, we'll win our match tonight and then be back on broadcast very soon.
I,
But
weren't
I
the
would definitely,
Weren't the
yeah.
casters telling us about how they were having to fight over who broadcast one of the matches yesterday? Surely they should have fought over broadcasting this one, but just no broadcast.
Well, that's
Unfortunate.
yeah. I mean, nobody really knew,
I know.
right?
I know.
Who we were, and then like both matches. So I think it's us and it's us versus Obey,
Okay.
and then our door versus Wisp, I
Okay.
believe.
Okay. And
Um,
so when you beat Obey, because they're washed, and you
yes,
said that, not me. When you beat them, who would you then be going up against? Do we know that at this point in the bracket?
yes, I believe it's the loser of Odyssey versus American Tornado.
Okay, okay. So you get to take your way through that, and then you would have to. Nice, nice. And then you would expect after that, remind me of the bracket length. After that, you would potentially be in that matchup against whoever got knocked down for the. I mean, that would be the losers finals after that. Yes.
Mm, yep,
Perfect.
and
Perfect.
then we're in grand finals. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Okay. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing it, and it was great to have you on here, Sham.
thank you.
I'm not seeing anything else question-wise from the chat. I think we did a good job of covering it, so I hope to talk to you again soon. Maybe sometime in the future when you can tell me all about how, hey, look at these multiple championships that Malice has. That would be great.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Talk to you soon, Sham. Take
All
care.
right.